Regardless of the way your board governs, be it a collection of best practices or a full system such as policy governance, there are a handful of universal principles that your board should be following. Today we'll look at these, and as you watch this video, I invite you to consider whether your board covers each of these universal principles, because being universal principles, these apply to all boards. But first, we need to understand the foundation for the principles. That foundation is the board's accountability. Of course, the board is accountable to act lawfully. One could also argue it's accountable to the broader society. But there is one group that rises above all others when it comes to the board's accountability. And that accountability has major implications for governance. To illustrate, let's start by thinking of a corporation with shareholders. Those shareholders are represented at the top of this diagram. Acting on behalf of the shareholders, the board, the next group down in the diagram, provides oversight for the operations which are led by the CEO, the individual shown in the diagram. Notice how authority is delegated downward in the diagram while accountability rises back up through the same chain of command. In other words, the board is accountable to the shareholders, and while it's accountable to others for ethical and lawful conduct, its accountability to the shareholders also includes organizational performance. But what about a non-profit organization which doesn't have shareholders in a similar manner? Well, sometimes legislation makes the board the shareholder. But is the board only accountable to itself? I suggest that even for a non-profit, the board needs to hold itself accountable for performance to someone other than itself. John Carver describes such a group as the moral ownership. More recently, the term ownership has fallen out of favor in some places, but whatever term we use for it, we're really talking about some group to whom the board holds itself accountable as if they were shareholders. And if that's the case, then Carver and co-author Caroline Oliver recognize these implications or universal principles for governance. For starters, look at the location of the board in this diagram. It's the board, not management, which is the link between the operational part of the organization and those to whom the board is accountable. Okay, but what does that mean? It means that the board should bring the values of that group into the decisions and actions within the organization. In other words, on behalf of those to whom the board is accountable, the board must translate their values into operational performance. Aha, you say, we've got a list of values, and I'm guessing those might include transparency, integrity, honesty, to name a few, and that's good. But values include so much more, such as what difference should the organization make, for whom, and what is it worth to produce that difference? Think of the board as the wise agent of those to whom it's accountable. The term agent means it's making decisions on someone's behalf. That being the case, it should do so in a way that reflects their values. The term wise means that it's making informed decisions after careful consideration. There's so much to unpack in that, but we'll save that for another day. Secondly, if the board is standing in on behalf of some group equivalent to shareholders, the board is the highest authority in the organization proper. This means the board is commander, not management's advisor. Now, that may sound a bit harsh, indeed, almost military, but clarity of authority and accountability are key for effective governance. So, is the board not advisor? Doesn't it make sense for the board to share its wisdom with the CEO? Well, every CEO worth their salt knows that advice from the board cannot be treated the same way as advice from anyone else. In other words, if they fail to follow the advice, they do so at their own peril. That is not the case with advice that comes from other sources. But note that I've not been referring to the board as they. This is our third principle. The board is not a they, the board is an it. If the board is standing in on behalf of some group equivalent to shareholders, it's the board as a whole, not individual board members, that hold the board's authority. If you have a board of 9 directors, each of the 9 do not hold 1/9 of the authority of the board. Individually, they hold none of the board's authority. But when operating as a whole, the board holds all the authority. So, when does the board use that authority? Whenever the board makes its decisions. For most boards, this is a majority vote from among all those who voted if a quorum is in place. In other words, a vote of 5-4 carries as much weight as a vote of 9-0. When the board has decided, that is the board's decision. And those decisions must be recorded in the minutes as decisions, not just conversations. And board members must support the legitimacy of those decisions. Principle 4. If the board is standing in on behalf of those to whom it is accountable, then the board should be the initial authority rather than the reactive authority. Consider how boards traditionally operate. Management brings proposals to the board. The board reviews the proposal and decides whether to adopt it, revise it and adopt the revised version, tell management to revise it before it adopts it, or just tosses the whole proposal. In each of these cases, the board is reacting. And if the board is reacting to management's proposals, who's in the lead? Is it the board, or is it management? Certainly the board has ultimate authority within the organization, but that doesn't put it in the lead. If the board is standing in on behalf of those to whom it's accountable, shouldn't the board be in the lead? Principle 5. If the board is standing in on behalf of those to whom it is accountable, then the board has accountability for everything in the organization. This includes performance of board committees, board officers, board members, and the board itself. It's also accountable for operational performance. Everything lands on the shoulders of the board. But here's the conundrum. The board is a part-time organism, often governing a full-time operation. The full-time operation has hundreds or thousands more decisions to make than the board has time for. On top of that, board decisions are restricted to those times that the board is in session, once a month or quarterly for most boards, which takes us to our 6th principle. John Carver and Caroline Oliver put it this way: good governance must integrate a compelling approach to delegation, one that is rigorous in safeguarding the board's own accountability, yet as freeing and empowering others as it can responsibly be. When the board underplays its role, owners are cheated in that their only legitimate and authoritative representative has a weak voice. When a board overplays its role, owners are cheated in that their only legitimate and authoritative representative does not know how to get the most out of management. Let that sink in for a moment. How is your board doing in this regard? Underplaying or overplaying its role? Or optimizing delegation? By the way, perhaps the most effective way to delegate optimally does not involve telling management what to do. Governance is not management one step up, it's ownership one step down. If you want to learn more about that distinction, I invite you to book a discovery call with us in the link in the notes below. So, how does your board measure up? Are you on track with these universal principles? In my experience, the answer to these questions and more will determine whether your board truly adds value for those to whom you are accountable.